They say hunger makes the food sweet, but in the kingdom of Umu-Ogu, the king's hunger was so great, he didn't realize he was eating his own son. In the prosperous kingdom of Umu-Ogu, where the red earth was rich with yams, lived a hunter named Emeka. He had a fragile wife, Nkechi, and a daughter, Adanna, whose beauty made the sun pause. Emeka was the king's shadow. He saved King Zebrudaya's life 3 times. Because of that, loyalty bound them in a sacred oath. But fate is cruel. Emeka took a poisoned arrow meant for the king. With his final breath, he extracted a promise: protect my family. The king swore on his throne that they would never know hunger. For 3 moons, the king honored his word. Food was sent, and the widow was cared for, until Lolo Ugodia, the king's new wife, poisoned his mind. Her heart was black with jealousy over Adanna's beauty. She whispered that Emeka's family was a curse, a drain on the treasury. Slowly the food stopped coming. The gates were barred. Adanna watched in horror as her mother began to wither like a dry leaf. Hunger became their only companion, while the king threw lavish banquets where food was wasted on the floor. The crumbs alone could have saved them. Then sickness took hold of her mother, and the hero's family was forgotten. The promise made by the king to Emeka was broken. When Nkechi finally succumbed to the hunger, Adanna's world collapsed. She ran into the village square, begging for help to bury her mother. But the suffering of the poor is often a spectacle for the rich. Neighbors who once ate at Emeka's table turned their faces away. The king's wife had done her work well, spreading rumors. She is an Ogbanje, a cursed child who sucked the life from her parents. Compassion turned to hatred, and the king, the man who owed his breath to her father, he looked down with cold, dead eyes. "Take her to the evil forest," he commanded. They dragged her and her mother's corpse toward the boundary, a place where no sunlight touches the ground. If you survive the night, you belong to the ghosts. Adanna lay shivering beside her mother's cold body. She listened to the hyenas laugh in the distance, but something inside her broke. Not her heart. That was already gone. Her fear was replaced by a cold, burning void. A scream for justice rose within her, and the forest listened. Deep within the belly of the forest, she buried her mother with her bare hand. Her tears watered the dry earth as the last handful of soil fell. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. From the roots emerged Ani, the earth goddess, judge of the wicked. She had watched the betrayal from the soil beneath the king's feet. Her voice sounded like grinding stones. "Rest in peace," she offered, "or return as judgment." Adanna remembered the king's fat face and the Lolo's mockery and chose vengeance. But the price was her humanity. She drank the pain, and it dissolved into power. The starving orphan vanished. In her place stood Madame Kamsi, a woman of breathtaking, dangerous glamour, possessed with a secret recipe for a stew that could enslave the soul, and a herd of cattle that were not animals at all, but the spirit forms of the greedy villagers themselves. She would serve them the very wickedness they had sown. The time for weeping was over. The time for eating had begun. 5 years later, a mysterious wealthy woman opened the pot of life. Madame Kamsi arrived not as a beggar, but as a queen of commerce. The aroma of her spicy stew drifted into the nostrils of every man. It triggered an unnatural hunger. They abandoned their homes to queue at her door. The meat melted on the tongue like a mother's embrace. Even the king grew bored with his royal chefs until he tasted Madame Kamsi's stew. He became addicted instantly. He honored this stranger, blinded to the fact she was the girl he sentenced to death. But as the restaurant flourished, darkness fell. Men began to disappear in the dead of night, and fresh cattle would appear in Madame Kamsi's yard the next morning, waiting for the butcher's knife. But the villagers never knew that they were eating their own brothers and neighbors. Even the queen was blinded by gluttony. But the king, the most gluttonous of all, ate with reckless abandon, unknowingly consuming the essence of his own people. Madame Kamsi watched him from the shadows. Her smile was as sharp as a razor. She was feeding the beast until it was ready for slaughter. The reckoning arrived on the day of the New Yam Festival. The king demanded the largest feast in history. Madame Kamsi prepared a special dish from a prize catch. She caught a young bull the night before. It was the king's own son. The king tore into the meat, praising its texture. Suddenly, a wandering priestess burst into the palace. "Abomination," she screamed. "You all are cannibals." She cast a spell of revelation. The illusions shattered. The bones on the plate screamed with the voice of his son. The stew turned to human blood. The villagers start wailing in madness, realizing what they had done. In the chaos, Madame Kamsi shed her disguise, revealing Adanna, glowing with the terrifying light of the earth goddess. She looked at the trembling king. "You promised to provide for my family. Now you have become the feast." The king's heart burst from the weight of his guilt. She did not stay to rule. She walked out of the devastated palace. She returned to the riverbank, where the goddess waited. She stepped into the water and dissolved into foam, leaving behind a kingdom that would never forget. The cost of greed is to be consumed by it. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.